Had quite a few technical difficulties during the first hour, but we've succeeded in connecting with my special guest, Thom Reed, who is a close friend for 12 years. We've been working on disclosure together, and we have succeeded. And Thom has the distinction of having experienced a family UFO incident in 1966 that has been acknowledged by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts as a verifiable and true event and is now recorded in American history officially in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So, Thom, welcome to the program. Thank you for your patience.
Yeah, not at all, man. I'm really sorry about all this. I have no idea what happened there. But again, for your listeners, when you came on UFO Man with us, the same friggin' thing happened. So I don't
Exactly.
know what's going on, and it's a rare thing. But anyway, yeah, you're absolutely right. We had a slew of we had three actually. 1966 was the first incident we were part of, and of course there was 1967, which actually made the papers. I don't know if you've seen this before, but that's actually our incident that was rerun in the news after it made history, and so
Is,
they reran it in the Berkshire Eagle.
is
And
that the one where lady, it says woman chased UFO for 10
yeah, that was the Zuko family, and
Yeah.
I hung out with Pete Zuko, and they were neighbors of ours and the whole thing. So that was anyway. So that was part of what kickstarted really everything in our diner because there was a we weren't supposed to talk about it. The space race, secret, programs are being done. We had a lot of military manufacturing facilities or government-funded manufacturing facilities in our neighborhood, like Sprague Electric, which made the Goodwill message that was left on the moon. Those people who worked on that actually ate in our diner, and the reason for that too. And I don't mention this a whole lot, but our diner was down the street from the second largest racetrack to Saratoga, the Great Barrington Fair Racetrack. It was considered the crown jewel of horse racing, and you probably remember that it wasn't too far from New York City, and it wasn't as big as Saratoga, but it was pretty popular. And so, if you wanted to spend so much money on junk food, you ate there, or if you wanted a good sandwich or meatloaf or whatever, you came to our diner, right? So those who had money and those who were affluent in the area ate in our diner. And so all this UFO topic started to be discussed in our diner, And like I said, in '67, we were one of the first ones to see anything. We were out of towners. We were from New York, and so we were kind of outcast from the beginning. And then, of course, the space race were involved in all that. We had no idea that what was going on in the area. General Electric, Command Aerospace, magnesium that was mined for the atom bomb was actually mined in Canaan, Connecticut, about 3 miles from our diner. And so with that, there was a lot of activity in the area, and also a lot of talk about the space race and beating Russia to space and the moon landing and all that kind of stuff in '69. And so in '69, like 6 weeks before, we actually touched down on the moon, again, everybody had pretty much accomplished what they needed to for that launch. And because the horse race, was a big draw, people were all kind of finished with what their projects were because a lot of them were contracted. And so they met and came to our diner to eat. And they knew my mother and they discussed it openly because it was kind of like, you know, if you if you're going to talk to God, you do that in church, but you don't do that in like Walmart, right? And
Right.
so if you were in our diner, you could talk openly about things, but you couldn't talk about it outside, the area or outside a restaurant because their children might say something they shouldn't, then their parents or relatives could possibly lose their job or something. And so our diner was the hub for that conversation. And with that, my mother became very close to the children because the parents used to drop their children off in our diner, and they would walk across the street to school or ride their bikes to school. We'd all kind of meet at the diner, have breakfast together. My mom would make a pancakes or whatever. They ran a tab back in the day, and a couple of the people that would later vote this into history were one of those children. And you mentioned Kevin Titus, how he was a magistrate. He's actually a judge, and he's the one who sealed the documents. But he was one of the kids that used to eat in our diner back in the day during this conversation. This space race type of conversation and the sightings in the area. So one of the things that I would mention too was that we were the only eatery with a jukebox. And so if you wanted to listen to the Stones or have a sandwich and listen to music, you also came to our diner. So what I'm trying to say is our diner was like the hub for all this conversation. And it was active because of its location, being diagonally across the street from the racetrack. And so I would say that after the sighting, I'll get into that in a minute, how this whole thing happened was that my father ended up dying, losing his life on the same day, or the anniversary, I should say, of the date it was discussed at the United Nations in support of General Assembly 33426, which you had mentioned earlier. And because of that, and the fact that we were so involved in the earlier activity in certainly our restaurant, we were contacted by the Historical Society to see if there was something they could do with this to kind of pay forward something to my late father, because he was also a politician and an attorney, and when he was approached by Robert Bletchman too around the same time, and to see if there wasn't something we could do at the United Nations as well that would tie in the Hudson River Valley sightings, which, so I'm jumping around a little bit, but Robert Bletchman, who used to be the public relations director for MUFON, was also an attorney and a colleague of my father's. And so during the 80s, when all this activity was taking place in New York, uh, um, Robert had said, well, Mr. Reed, would you mind if we mentioned your family's incident and its connection to all this stuff that was going on in the Berkshires, with his manufacturing facilities and this space race stuff. And so my dad's like, sure, I'm not, I'm no longer in office, right? I've had my 2 terms and that's it. So it actually was mentioned by our families and my father's friend and colleague, Robert Bletchman, who at the time was the public relations director for MUFON. We had no idea what that was back in the day. We had no idea what MUFON was. And so Stanton Friedman was there. Linda Morton Howe was there. Uh, Mohammed Rabidin was the president of the parapsychology at the time at the UN. And so all this stuff that, the papers that I've got that were resurfaced in 1992 that were first mentioned in 1974, I have copies of those. You would not believe what's in those documents. And so at the time our case was mentioned, it was really in support of the Hudson River Valley sightings. He really wasn't a front runner. It was mentioned in support because of my father's political connections and his pillar standing, if you will. And of course,
Tom,
yeah, yeah,
would you tell us about the event in the Upper Sheffield Covered Bridge?
sure, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
I'm just giving that
I'm
idea.
showing the images now that are in the article. Folks, you can follow along by going to robertmorningstar.substack.com, and I've published a lengthy article with photographs of the scenes and Tom's parents and Tom himself at the age of 10 and the proclamation. So you can
Yeah,
follow along the narrative if you go to robertmorningstar.substack.com. Thank you. Now we're
yeah,
going to hear about the event that happened to Tom and his family, mother, grandmother, and brother, as they passed through a bridge, a beautiful covered bridge. It's called the Upper Sheffield Covered Bridge. So, Tom, back to you.
yeah. It isn't really important as how this got into history, but well, we can jump over to this, I guess. So that night in September, this was not actually 1966; it was '69 when we went through the bridge. This particular incident, and so when we had, it was a really hot night that night. I was riding a horse show. We went back to the diner to lock it up and took a shortcut home because it was running late. We went through the bridge, and that right there is the entrance to the bridge. So we actually went up the wood area right there. That was back in the day that was dirt under there. And as you went across the bridge, I mean, it was ratty. It was never meant to be a road. It was meant to be like a horse and buggy type thing.
Yeah.
And so when we went through it and came out the opposite side, which looks very similar to that, not quite as steep, my grandmother turned around to say, don't give your brother a candy, Tom, because I was ready to unwrap like it was fireballs and give him a candy. And she thought he could choke. And that's when she looked off to the back of the station wagon, which would actually look right underneath the bridge pretty much. I mean, it was not far from the below that bridge where she saw this white sphere. You guys talked about a sphere earlier. This thing was about the size, like 4 times the size of a Volkswagen Beetle, and it was started to rise from the banks. Now, I've never said it came out of the water. I don't know where it came from, but it was right there hovering over the water and rose to about 3 stories high, I guess, quite a bit higher than the bridge itself. And so we're only going like 5 miles an hour. You can see this how this road is. I mean, we weren't going very fast at all. Maybe like you could run probably faster than we were driving. The potholes and everything else. So we were going really, really slow, and it was hot. So we had the windows open. There was no glare in the windows, nothing. We're looking at the sphere just rise, and it was like a cue ball. It was self-contained. There was no bleed of light. It was very crisp, right? It was like almost like crystal, and it put off maybe a glow like a 2 to 5 watt bulb, but it never bled, and it was huge. And so my brother was trying to look at it, so he turns to his right, which is the right of that picture actually, and there was another orange sphere, if you will. It was much smaller, and it was just over the water. And so we basically split them. There was one at maybe 7 o'clock, and the other one was about 3 o'clock. And so we just split them and kept going down this dirt road. And there was a telephone pole not too far down where the equipment would. This road was so narrow, there was only so many spots where you could go to get off to the side and let the other car come if it was coming in the opposite direction. And so that's where my mother pulled off. And it wasn't too far from this bridge, maybe 40 yards. And so at the time that we started to get to this rest area, all of a sudden, man, it was like we were deep underwater. There was like a pressure change. It was like I've referenced like being in the middle of a hurricane where you don't hear anything. There's no wind. There's no leaves. There's no animals. There's no chirping. There's nothing. It was like someone just flipped the switch off on life itself. I mean, it became that still and quiet. And the
That
only
is
thing I
often
remember hearing,
described, Tom, that is often described as a common element. There's no wind, there's no sound,
no,
like a void, like sound can't travel somehow in
right,
that atmosphere. That happened in Texas a couple of years ago. This guy was out there. Oh, you know when the Stephenville event happened over there in
yeah,
Texas, which was a big deal. There was a hunter out there in the woods, and he had a telescopic sight on his rifle, and all of a sudden that happened to him. And as a result, he took a scope and he looked up and he got a very, very close look at the structure of the UFO that was right above his head.
that's fantastic. So
Yeah.
yeah, we heard a sound though. It was like when you're in a pool and you hear that someone makes a noise or taps the side of it, it like echoes, but everything else is muted. It was very much like that, where we hear ting 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 ting, and I remember mentioning it as sounding like little stones tapping underneath our fender wall of our car. So ping 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 like that. Yet everything else was muted. I remember being able to see all of a sudden, bang, the car lit up. I could see the dashboard. I could see, and here's the neat. Here, I guess that what's kind of hard to get your head around is like to have so much light hit you and not have it bother your eyes. It wasn't like a dome light went on in our car. I mean, bang, everything was lit up. I could see.
Tom, I remember reading a very detailed account, and I thought there was something about the light coming through the slats of
Yeah,
the
there was a little bit of light. Yeah, my
coming
grandmother
through the
saw that.
slats of the bridge, the wood, the
Yeah.
construction.
That's true too. Yeah, and that was another thing that when we saw the thing, the light was all contained, but my grandmother did see some light coming through the bottom planks of the bridge, and she had said something later to us that it was kind of weird because I didn't, there was more light than there should have been for the amount of headlight we were using. It was like there was extra bleed of light. But see, we never saw the light come off the sphere. We did see some rods of light that fired into the water for a moment and then retracted. So for a moment or two, it looked like an ice cream cone or like an upside down Hershey's Kiss, like boom. But it retracted. Everything that I saw was very definitive. But my grandmother did say that there was light. So maybe there was something else also that we didn't see. Was it that the sphere was able to project light? I have no idea how to connect that. Just like when the car just boom lit up. Um, we didn't see the sphere anymore. We didn't know where it was. For all I know, it was over the vehicle. I don't know. We've had a lot of different shows have said, well, maybe that's what was over your car. Maybe that's what filled your car with light. I don't know where it came from.
Tom Andrew has a question.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, Tom.
Hey.
Man, it sounds like you were describing a few scenes from Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Spielberg's seminal film.
Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, the light through the slats when the little boy was in his house with his mother, and the alien, were above the house, and all these weird lights were coming in from different directions. The cone-shaped objects. It's just.
I gotta watch it again.
Yeah,
and the light. How about the light on the pickup truck when he stops at the crossroads and it comes up from above him and rattles the signs and goes on.
Sometimes you wonder where Hollywood gets their ideas from, right?
Well, we know that Spielberg consulted with Hynek is in the movie. Your friend Hynek appears at the end. He pops out when the UFO is landing and he puts the pipe in his mouth.
I didn't know that.
And when that film was CIA directed, folks, that they were telling us the real deal as much as they knew then, in order to assuage our anxieties and make the ETs look, like smiley faces and friendly. Well, I have my reservations about that. Andrew, what else did you want to say?
No, that was it. It just sounded so vividly like you were reading script from that movie. It was just unbelievable.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. So let me tell you what else happened here, right? Because there were 3 parts, and I want to get your opinion on something. So when we split the 2 spheres, right, the one on the left and the one on the right, which is much smaller, and we came past them and we had stopped, there was, like I said, a totally different change in environment. And one of the things that we talk about a lot was how hot it was. And so the windows were open. Again, it was super clear out. And we looked off to our left, and in the field, there was this sphere, this disc. Now, we did say that it had a light to it, but it wasn't, again, putting off light. The sides of it, the upper top of it, were turning like a color. The thing was not the same shade of colors everywhere. The top was more like a reddish. The left side wasn't putting off any light at all. Underneath it, there was no light like coming down, but the shell of it, or the skin of it, and you have a very good picture of it, a depiction, if you will, lit up. And Melanie from Berkshire's UFO or Unsolved Mysteries, she's the only one who's ever described it in that light. And I didn't used to talk about it too much. And then she said, yeah, put off this like red tint on the top. I'm like, son of a gun, you saw that. And so
Tom, I know someone else who described that to me, and he was an Iranian general. He was an Iranian colonel who flew the F-4 incident in 1979. September 16, 1979, there was a UFO event over Iran, and he went up to chase it, and it loosed out a bright white light that came at his craft, and he thought he was going to die from a missile. It also froze all of his electronic equipment and stopped his arming of his missile. And then he broke off, and then he saw it go down to land in the desert. And he described an iridescent craft that was luminous and changing colors all around. So there have been other people. This was General Parvez Jafari, who became the chief of staff of the Iranian Air Force. Now, after you saw this iridescence, let's call it, the multiple colors.
Well, more like a red, just a red.
Yeah. Did you just go on?
No.
Or stop?
We were stopping, and at this point, when we saw it, we were already stopped. We had already kind of heard that tapping sound, like when you're underneath the pool, and it was, quiet. It was hot. We were not ourselves at that point. I don't think we were really, we were felt something happening to our bodies. My mom says it was like a closeness, like when you're wrapped with cellophane or something. There was something happening at the same time we saw this, and so later we realized that we were in the middle of 3 objects, And so we used to think, well, were they communicating? Were we caught in the middle of some type of communication? Is that what we were feeling?
Mhm.
But then there was that flash, and then that's the last thing I remember from being in the car. And yeah, that's the that's their diner appearance.
Well, this photo I'm choosing to show now actually
Salem.
happened in Massachusetts as well.
Salem.
Yeah, Salem, Massachusetts. Now, the interesting thing about this photo is that it was around since the 1960s, but the U.S. government always cropped it and cropped out. It would leave the towers and
Right.
just about this much. And then over years of time, I kept researching, then found this other object up in the air. And if you look really closely, there's a UFO landed in the parking lot. You described something that looked like a Volkswagen. Correct?
No, I said it was about the size of 4
Oh,
buildings.
about the size of a
Yeah.
Volkswagen.
Yeah,
And now, look at this one. This is settled down in the parking lot while 4 others are in the air. So let's continue this saga. This is really remarkable.
So it was like a combination of a lot of different things, and so again, we thought there was definitely a human element to it. We've always said that because of the amount of government that was in the area. That's why I started with that earlier, because I was trying to get an idea of all the, there were jeeps being seen coming out of the hills, and the NORAD tower was in Dalton, not far away, and so we've always tried to make sense of what we were a part of, and so being this, whatever this was, it just, one minute I'm looking at the dashboard, I'm looking at my parents, my mother, my grandmother, and next thing I know, I'm sliding off like a table of some sort, and it wasn't like what a lot of other people describe. I mean, it was just like I opened my eyes, if you will, or when I first saw this new environment of mine. It was like a large open hangar. There were lights where the walls met the ceiling. It almost looked like fluorescent tubes of some kind. It was like a space, a light, a space, a light. There was not much anything that I could see that was there. It was large. It was like the size of an airplane hangar. And I was grabbed by my left arm. It hurt. This was not soft and spiritual by any means. It seemed harsh and barbaric, and I was walked through an opening. I was taken out a door in this long hallway with high walls, and it wasn't it was kind of narrow actually, and there were no rounded corners. And when I got to the end, there was a left and right. It teed off. I was taken to the left and into this room, and had a big glassed-in area.
Could you see who grabbed you?
I don't remember that. I remember what grabbed me hurt. I do remember seeing someone at an entrance with like a doorway where it was lighter. And again,
Did the grab seem mechanical or organic? Was it a human, animal, or was it something that felt mechanical?
That's a good question, because what I later saw looked like an ant to me, like a large ant, and I think you've seen images of it.
Oh, yes. Let me tell the folks, Thom produced what I consider one of the best UFO documentaries, autobiographies, if you will, that I've ever seen. And he went to great lengths.
Yeah.
Let me bring Thom into the view. I'm going to put speaker's view, and you can describe this creature for us so we can see it. Go ahead.
So this is...
Back off a little bit.
Yeah.
There you go. That's
what
right near the mic, or just a little ahead of the mic would be better.
I'm sorry?
Just a little forward of the mic.
How's that?
Yeah, now turn his eyes toward us.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
that is pretty much what we saw. And this was made by a student who went to the same college I did in Connecticut, and made it for the Roswell Museum.
So
and this is about as upsetting as it could be, because it's quite accurate from what I remember.
Mm-hmm.
And then again, I questioned myself. As a kid, was I, scared? Did I make it? But when I see it, that's what I feel it looked like, right? So just like when I see bamboo today, even to this day, bamboo reminds me of the limbs that it had.
How interesting.
Yeah, and it had
That's
rings around it that looked like red wine colored rings, not up and down the leg, but circles. And so I
spirals, you
wore that
mean?
most of my life. I'm sorry?
Was it spiral or bands? Circles or
Bands. Bands.
bands? Hmm.
Uh,
And I recall that as you were led or walking through the craft, you heard your brother.
I wasn't on a craft.
Well, you said you were inside a hangar. I thought that would be
No,
the inside of it.
no, and I'll tell you why I say that.
Uh-huh.
Because where I was very industrial. It did not. This is where a lot of the communication, the people who write about this stuff,
Right.
never said I was on a craft. I'm not, and also the room that I was taken to, and I'll explain this. So I've tried to go in a certain pattern here. When I was into this room where all this glass was, and it looked like block glass, like you have in a when back in the day you had like these bricks, but they were glass, like these blocks. That's what it looked like. It looked like a glass. It bowed inward on each end, so it came inward, and there were walls to the outside. That I was sitting on this table now, another table, which had a pole in the middle, reminding me of an autopsy table. It rose up, and the base came out on top. And it met.
Can you get closer to the mic because it fades when you back
Yeah, I'm
away?
sorry. So the bottom rose, which I was on, the top lowered, and then this cage type apparatus came out. It was like one piece over another. So I was on this table. The first one lowered over me to kind of keep me in place, I guess. And the other one went over that, and these holes lined up. There were circles on each side. And there was this, it did not look like a gray, maybe a hybrid of some kind, but it looked very human on the left side of me. And they were putting packets on my body that looked like large, like a large raisin, like a black packet. One on my leg, they went on my side, and they went on my upper body. And so this
Were
was
they small or were they, what size were
probably about half the size of a cell phone.
they? Mm-hmm.
And again, I was young, so things seemed bigger,
Yeah.
maybe the size of a mouse.
Yeah. Tom,
And-
let me say this. You struck a very strong chord in me in my memory. I have a sense that this event that happened to you was in concert with the military industrial complex.
Yeah.
Because I know a lady, she was a young lady, but she's a mature woman now, and she had multiple events like this, and she told me that in one of the last events that happened that we consulted about 2015, she said that she was taken into a large hangar and that the ET was presenting her to uh, a group of military men who were sitting at a table, long table, and they were watching this demonstration. And what the alien was doing was offering to them mind control technology to control people exactly as this alien was controlling her. And that happened in a hangar. So I just want to share that with you. So what happened after the table?
Well, so at one point, so at one point, I've got somebody coming in the door here. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Scoot, guys.
Welcome to the show.
So, what I would say is one of the reasons I say that wasn't a craft either was at one point I actually had run. I had ran out the right side of this glass wall, and I came into this area that I remember like the floors being white. There were some markings on the floor, but this area was larger than an empty Walmart. I mean, it was much bigger than the craft we had seen. And that's one of the things that makes me feel like that's why I also believe we weren't on the craft, because the hangar area also was part of this, which was also larger than what we saw. And so I keep thinking, well, maybe we're underground somewhere. So, like, I'm tracking where you're going with this because I've always said there was military involved. There was something happening there. And so with that, I've struggled with where, what really happened, right? Like, where were you? Where was I? I could hear my mother. I could hear my grandmother. I could hear voices.
Oh, what were they saying? If you could hear them. By the way, Andrew asked what color the room was. He may be
I
drawing.
think it was pretty much white.
Mhm.
I don't remember. There were markings. I think they were like a gray.
So, what was the sound that you heard from your mother, your grandmother, or what did they sound like? If you could eat, I mean, tone. Maybe you couldn't hear exactly what they were saying, but what was the tone of
It
their
was
expression?
just like a holler, like calling out. I don't
Oh,
even know for sure it was my mother, but it certainly, to me, sounded like it was her.
calling your name?
I was like almost 10 years old, so it was a long time ago, but I heard female voices, sounded like my mother. Um, I don't. It was such a long time ago. I don't remember what they were saying, but
Yeah.
um, I wasn't alone. My brother had a club foot, and he remembers attention being put on his brace on his leg.
Mhm.
My grandmother had always said that there was something very personal done to
Mhm.
her.
Yes. Now, can we go back in time to the first event of 1966? Because I think the audience really is fascinated by your experience. I think they should know the background. And then in about 10 minutes, we're going to go into, cover the history of how you got to have the acknowledgement. And then I want to cover the UFO Expo.
Okay.
Andrew has a question there. Andrew?
Yeah, Tom, before we leave this, that space that you were in, you said you were 10. Did it feel like it went on forever in any sense to you, or was it pretty contained?
Um, I think the whole thing seemed kind of fast. I mean,
Okay.
I remember a lot of different things happening. Going to and from a hallway, and in some respects, I remember quite a bit. Uh, I know that almost 3 hours had passed when my grandmother had. I want to post. I really want to continue with something here.
Okay, please do. Go ahead.
I'm going to jump around like this because I'm getting half. I'm telling half of what happened. But because this is important,
Sure.
we came back to the vehicle. My mother and grandmother were reversed. My grandmother was now in the driver's seat. The
Mhm.
ignition in the car was off, and the headlights, of course, were off. But when we were parked, the headlights were on, the car was running. So that's another reason that I keep saying that there was a human element involved.
Turning the key, turning off the lights.
Much bigger than what we saw.
Mhm.
It seemed barbaric. I remember being in pain. I remember the heartache my family had. There was a lot of time that went by. We came out of this at different times. We didn't all come out of this at the same time.
Mhm.
My grandmother came to first and happened to be in the driver's seat. Drove us back to Silk Store, who remembers us coming in, asking for help. The radio station had been broadcasting live. Had interrupted a broadcast on the radio to ask for people to call to let them know where this thing was that was sighted. The Sheffield Police Department was dispatched.
So this broadcast was happening at the same time that
Yeah.
was happening to you?
Yeah.
So other people were aware of the presence of this UFO in the
That's
neighborhood.
why it's so important. They
Oh,
started.
amazing. It really is amazing. Really remarkable.
Yeah. So it's even more than that. If you saw Berkshire's UFO, Melanie Kirchdorfer was taken at the exact same time. She had not been returned to her family at the same time. She encountered this at Lake Mansfield, which is like 5 minutes up the road. People playing golf at Jug End for the holiday had reported it. That's where it got its Heineck classification. Tom J. had called the police department, asked how he could help. The police department had asked him to go back on the air and interrupt the radio broadcast, which was a reel-to-reel at the time, to say, let us know where this thing is. And then Eddie Galata, who was on Unsolved Mysteries, they called his father. And his father was the chief of police, so he rode with his father, went looking for the craft that had touched ground in Sheffield. This never happened in Great Barrington, like Unsolved Mysteries said, the Berkshire's UFO. It didn't happen in Great Barrington because they show the officer looking through the police logs back then to see if anything had been called in. That was a different town. So it didn't happen there. And so all these pieces had come together, and they had the police, and they were dispatched to where this happened after we had gone home. And so they were, the broadcast of people calling into the radio station was played the next morning when we opened up our diner. And people were saying, "Oh, that's my uncle. I know this person. I've heard, I know about that." So that is how so many people remembered it. It was also a holiday. It was Labor Day. So all these people were out barbecuing, groups that they wouldn't normally socialize with. And so you had testimony from 20 or 30 people from one friggin' group, like the 4-H horse show, like the Jug Inn golfers. People at Jug Inn Resort were outside leaving their dinners to look at this thing in the sky. Mm-hmm. That's where the HINET classification came from. And so, to me, after everything that we experienced and how broad this was, it just hits me in the gut. Like, it just screams like there's a military involvement here. Now, what do you think?
Well, as I've said, everything you've said to me points to a human element, and the human element may be a cooperative that has been happening for 70 years between the United States government and the entity, the gray presence, as I like to call it. And there is evidence that the United States government signed a treaty, a cooperation treaty, ranging rights, I call it, that they signed a treaty with a particular race or races of these ETs to allow them to do these things and to American citizens in exchange for something.
Eisenhower
is one of them, the Greada Treaty. But earlier than that, in 1947, Einstein and Oppenheimer, the men who created the atom bomb, were asked by the United States government what to do with a race of Celestians. That was the word they used for aliens there, Celestians, people from the sky, that had decided to settle on planet Earth. And in the greatest betrayal of the human race that I could ever imagine or describe, Albert Einstein and Robert Oppenheimer, the fathers of the atomic bomb, agreed to, they agreed among themselves to advise the United States government to draw up a treaty or treaties with these Celestians, these aliens, and that would ensure the survival of our, now there's an interesting word, would ensure the survival of our culture and give them settling rights and what I call ranging rights, the right to go around and, do these experiments for whatever it is, the DNA that they need, but to keep it secret from mankind through the United Nations and the United States government officially. That's why I said to you earlier that this disclosure movement is so important, because the greatest threat to the world today are the machinations of the deep state, which are leading us into World War III and possibly nuclear holocaust. And the entire reason for the existence of the deep state was to keep the deep secret of the UFOs and the alien presence on Earth. As soon as we expose this, there's no need for that. There's no need for them or the CIA or any of these hundreds of security agencies that have sprouted from this event. Yeah. Let me ask you about the psychological aftermath. You talked about being in pain. How long did the pain last? And what about the psychological conditions that your grandmother and you and your mother endured?
Okay. I would first say that the off-world was nowhere near as troubling as the on-world. The way people treated us, the way people treated my mother afterwards, the fights in school, the mockery. We had to leave. My mother had to sell her horse farm. We had to sell the restaurant and move. As far as the event itself, we had 3 experiences.
Mhm.
And this one was very different. 69 was much different than 66 and 67. And again, that's when we were probably the only ones in the area that were talking about it. And that was also difficult, because we were outsiders to begin with. I mentioned that earlier. Whereas 69, so many other people saw what was happening that it almost put a bow around it. That's another reason it got inducted, because there were over 250 witnesses from that incident. And it was different. It was much more barbaric. It hurt. The pain, like it grab to the arm hurt. I remember that, and I remember at one point feeling like boiling hot water was running through my shoulders, my back, my arms. I mean, I remember sitting somewhere and just like screaming like it was like Ben Hansen had.
Did you have a bruise on your arm afterwards?
I don't remember. But I did have like an odd little scoop mark on my right hand, and I got one on my left, almost in the same spot.
In the palm or in another?
That's right. That's right. It's right in my hand there, and I've got another one over here.
Mm-hmm. Well, Tom, let me say something about scoop marks. I've studied this phenomenon for many, many years, and I studied the case of a hunter in the Yukon. His name was Kevin.
Okay.
And UFOBC.ca is one of the best UFO websites on the planet. Yeah. Now, what I found with the scoop marks is they always occur in areas of the body where the arteries and the vein comes closest to the surface, which means that it's the easiest place to tap the blood and draw the blood in these specific areas. Back to you.
Yeah, you probably know my brother had 2 like puncture wounds behind the ear and 2 over his chest at one point, which was over the only way to get to the thymus gland. Your body produces the T cells for your immune system, and it almost appears that there was something, something drawn out or removed, because the marks you had behind the ear is where your brain triggers your body to create those T cells.
Also, it's right there by the medulla oblongata, the section of the brain that controls the autonomic nervous system, and nerves from that region of the brainstem branch out into the brain and into the spinal muscles, and who controls that controls every muscle in your body. I'd also like to say that this the 2 marks on the back of Matthew's neck correspond to 2 marks that were described to me by a Polish lady, a friend of ours, who said that she woke up one day and she had these 2 marks in Poland back in the 1980s, and they never healed. And then one day she just took a knife and she carved into it. She got rid of one of them, but the other one still remained. Andrew has a question.
Yeah.
By the way, we're going to go on. When we come to the end of the hour, I'm going to release the server, but we are going to make up that hour that we lost with the technical difficulties, because this is one of the most important things that we've ever done regarding this phenomenon, and you are a witness of high caliber and high credibility. So, Andrew, you have a question?
Yeah, Tom, you said something very interesting. You said that you think there might have been some probing with your immunity, is that what you kind of said?
My brother had 2 puncture wounds. My brother went to the doctor, and we have the doctor's report. These were 1 centimeter in size, so I know they were small. They almost looked like a flange, almost like a snake bite, but with a raised rim or circle around it, and they were hardened. He had 2 behind the ear and 2 right below his rib cage. And according to the doctor, that if you wanted to extract anything from the thymus gland, that was the only way to access it. So if you had a needle, you went into that spot underneath the rib cage, that is exactly, you would have ran right into the thymus gland. Now, he did mention that there were some major arteries there. You had to be careful on how to do it. But there was a connection between the part of the ear that had the puncture wounds and the puncture wounds which were lined up to extract something from the thymus gland. We didn't come up with that. The doctor did. And he actually did a show with Travel Channel just before he died. He had cancer. And he interviewed with Mike Barra just before he passed. Also, something else you might find interesting too is that 9 of us in our family are O negative. My body runs at 97.1, 97.5. Every one of us is Rh negative, which is really weird. I actually married, my wife was AB negative. My son is AB negative. My dad was A negative. My mother was O negative. I'm O negative. And I got all that stuff sitting right here if you wanted to see it. So I'm wondering again that perhaps there was something of interest with families with O negative blood, because at the time in the 60s, during NOM, O negative blood was a universal donor. And again, the magnesium that was mined for the atom bomb was mined at the Canaan quarry. And later on, my father was the mayor of Canaan. I'm going to just, again, there's so much.
Well, this connection
here that we're just trying to.
Rh negative blood is many people believe that the Rh negative blood was introduced into the human race eons ago by an interaction and crossing, a hybriding with the gray presence or the fallen angels or the aliens. So this is a very common theme in hematology, UFO hematology, the study of the blood samples.
I believe there's something to that. I really do, because I think that O negative blood might have been the original blood of man. A lot of people think it came afterwards, but it really couldn't, because it's the more pure bloodline.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting how there's connections to O negative blood, and those who have that, if you will, are more sensitive. Time Magazine did an article that remote viewing, those who scored higher with coincidental chance, like my son, have that O negative blood group.
That's one of the interesting things about the Basque people. They have
Estonian.
No, Basque in Spain, between France and Spain.
Right.
I've heard that they have 85% O
That's
negative.
the highest population. Yeah.
Yeah, the highest concentration of O negative blood on the planet. Yeah.
Well, you start adding all this up, right? You come to this conclusion. Like I almost think that we were part of like an experiment.
That's why I refer to the deal that Einstein and Oppenheimer recommended to the U.S. government, to Truman's administration, as euphemism, ranging rights. Like ranging around, looking around, picking up specimens, dropping them off, dropping them out. It's very sinister. Peter has a question.
Yeah.
You have pretty vivid memories, and clearly you are fully aware that there is a race of a species out there with superior technology that could basically snatch you from your life at any time you want. Nothing to protect you. That's worldly. And I was just wondering how you have learned to deal with that vulnerability emotionally.
I don't have a problem with it. I mean, we're not. I hardly think that we're the most advanced civilization in the galaxy. I mean, we've got 8 million species on Earth now. We're finding new ones all the time. The animals that are here, if you will, all seem to be all like stocked. I mean, you can't just have a male and female of one species, because it all interbreed and get weak and die off anyway, right? We know that's how it works. So it's almost like it was stocked. I mean, we got 8 million species here. There had to be, hundreds of million to have these animals live and thrive. I mean, Earth rotates on a very unique axis. We can house, millions of species that require a different environment. We've got marsh, we have the desert, the rainforest, and at the same time, it's almost like Earth is our galaxy's arc. You have all this life here, and there's nothing anywhere else. I mean, you'd have to be ignorant not to know that we're not the most intelligent anyway. And so
Well, it's
with that,
you
I'm
know,
just,
I guess
I feel privileged. I feel privileged to see and be part of what happened. It altered my life. I mean, I learned a lot. As far as would I want that to happen to someone else? Probably not. But for me, you know, I said to my mother,
you seem to like have this awareness that will never happen to you again.
"Oh,
Why
it's
is
happened
that?
multiple times."
It's happened multiple times, Peter.
Yeah.
His brother was.
I know, but yeah, but what I'm saying is, in the future, he seems to have the security that it's not going to happen again.
No, I don't care if it does. Matter of fact, I
Really?
think if it did, I'd ask a lot more questions than I did at 10 years old.
Yeah.
You know,
That's incredible.
you know, why wouldn't I want to? It's already happened. I'm still here. I'm not hurt. I'm not dead. I'm not, you know, damaged goods. What's to be afraid
Yeah.
of?
That's right. That's right.
Why would I be
Well,
afraid?
I experienced it, and once I realized what happened, I was terrified. I
Of
felt
what?
like
What were you
I felt like a baby chick in a chick cage. At any time, somebody could come and scoop me out and fly me off.
But what happened to you to make you that scared?
Similar experience that you had.
What were you scared of
Full record
specifically?
that just I could be taken from any time
Okay, but you could
at
be
will from.
all right. Well, you know, like people say to me, why wasn't I? Why would I not be scared? Right? I'm more scared walking down the wrong street. You know, you get mugged, right? We get hurt, we get beaten, we can lose our eyesight. You know, we could lose a limb, get stabbed, jacked. That scares me. Having someone or be around an advanced technology that I've been around before that didn't really hurt me, why would I be scared of that?
Andrew has a question. And Andrew, when the music comes on, we'll take the break, but don't log off. We're going to continue the recording. We're going to make up the lost time from the first hour, and we're going to stay here as long as it takes to get Tom's story out. Okay, so you can ask your question now, but we're going to have the break in about a minute.
Yeah, no, just Tom, it was just continuing on what you talked about, the immune system, because, well, for the last 3 years, we've been dealing with a whole lot of things having to do with our immunity. And,
Right.
you know, there are some who believe that, well, in fact, Robert used to have in the second half of the show here, what was it, Robert, the Flash Gordon hour?
Oh, the Flash Gordon, well, we have special events called Flash Gordon Radio Club, and we play the opening of the Flash Gordon Conquers the Universe, which is called The Purple Death from Outer Space, which is about this plague that strikes the Earth and is being created by an aerosol dispersed electrified dust.